who would have that responsibility, or we can decide to rotate among the committee members in doing the minutes. And I think since some of us may be busy during the meeting and won't be able to take extensive notes, having the recording will definitely facilitate doing the minutes in that case. So let me ask: would anyone be willing to serve in the role of secretary to do the minutes on a regular basis?
Can I say something?
Yes, of course, Natalie.
Paul takes marvelous minutes for our fire department board meetings.
We'll go
I don't know if he wants to take on another one or not, but he's very good.
I nominate Paul.
That's a strong recommendation, Paul.
Please, people. I spend many hours a month on doing minutes for the Chevy Chase Fire Board on behalf of Martin's Editions. And really and truly, it is a lot of time. And I really don't feel I can do another set of those. And I very seldom say no to anybody asking me to do something. But I'm really overburdened right now. Because I do extensive minutes, Natalie knows.
Okay.
I think that might be kind of a good time where I would propose potentially rotating it. I think it's one where, kind of having one lead author at each meeting, and that kind of rotates, and then everyone else can kind of chip in, where that way, Paul's kind of expertise and experience in doing some of that, the burden's not all on him, but if there are things that are missed or kind of things like that, then there's a good opportunity for everyone else to kind of supplement and alleviate some of the burden on people.
Sure, I agree. Well, so George has proposed. I take it that's a motion.
I can't commit to that. I'm sorry. I'm pretty overwhelmed right now in my current role.
I see. Okay. Do you think at any point down the road that you would be able to, contribute to the
I
burden?
I can't predict. I'm the one full-time employee for my organization, so I work about 14 hours a day. So I work a lot, and I have 2 young children, and I'm not someone to turn something down like Paul, but I have to recognize where I've hit my threshold, and I'm almost at it.
Okay. Well, if
Maybe George would like
period
to
in
be
your
secretary.
year opens up when that might be possible, let us know. And
For sure.
Hey guys, I'm happy to volunteer in the rotation as well. I think Peter, you're talking about it being extensive notes. I think if we stick with the action items, that actually actionable items that will make a difference or could make a difference to community members, it shouldn't be overly burdensome. So I'm happy to help in the rotation. If someone wants to take the first round, I'm happy to take the second round just to see how they do the minutes. But I'm happy to fill Leah's role for now and be helpful as much as I can.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to do the minutes for this meeting. Okay. So, we could do it in alphabetical order, starting with K, I guess.
Oh shoot! How about? I was going to say not first names either.
It would be KK.
I don't win on that.
Come after me alphabetically.
Yeah.
So, I know. All right.
And so it would be you'll be next week, and then George is M, so that makes him the next one. And I don't know. I guess Natalie and Paul will have to fight it out. For us.
His name's longer than mine.
That's true. All right. So I think we've resolved, those pieces of business, and there are a couple of things that I would like to do, as in the business of starting the election committee. And I wanted to say a few words first about what I think the purpose or the goal, or shall we say the principles by which an election committee should be run. And that is, first of all, I think electoral fairness, treating all candidates equally, making sure that we're not giving an advantage to one over the other. I think that's fundamental. This should be a fair election, fairly done. Second, and I want to say also that, I think that these are aspirations for the committee as well as for each of us as members of the committee. So we should take these, so to speak, personally. My second general principle is that all valid votes are counted if possible. In other words, we should do what we can to avoid having votes be unnecessarily eliminated unless it's simply not possible. So typically votes are eliminated for fairly minor technical reasons, and I think that if we possibly can come up with a way to avoid discounting votes or eliminating votes, we should try to do what we can to do that. Third, I think our general principle is that we want to do what benefits voters. We want this to be something that encourages participation by voters. We want voters to be voting. We want residents to vote. We want people to be willing to run for office. And we want this to be as fair and open a process to encourage participation as we possibly can. And so that which benefits open voting, full participation, as much participation as we can get, that's the direction I think we should go. So what follows from that, I think, is to make it as easy as possible to vote when we can. Of course, that does not mean that we can do things. It doesn't mean that there are no limits to what we can do, but when it's possible, we should make it as easy as possible to vote. And finally, we should encourage participation of voters as candidates and in other ways as well, in campaigning and participating and asking questions in the candidate forum and so on. This is supposed to be a process that is a true outcome of the community's beliefs or feelings about the state of the village and who would best serve the interests of the voters. And so I think participation is critical to that. So I have based on that, I have a list of ethical propositions, I guess you could call it. And not Maimonides exactly, but I want to just run through these and briefly defend them. And I hope that we can adopt this as a committee. So let's see. I think there's 10 of them. First, no member of the VMA election committee is allowed to solicit or recruit any particular individual to run for office. To prevent any perception of favoritism, the committee is strictly limited to general public notices that encourage all eligible residents to run. The endorsement of council members presents a public perception of favoritism in the way elections may be administered. And I think that says it all. Any thoughts or comments on that? Yes.
I think it's a good one.
Is that something where, I know the ethics committee looked at it a little bit last year, and said that there were some potential concerns. Is that something where we would want to consult with the village attorney again this year to get kind of clarification on how we could approach that in a way where we're not going to trigger potential issues down the road?
That discussion, I just want to clarify, that discussion was about council members, council members' endorsements. And we can talk about that at a different point. But the question of the committee members, and this came up at the first meeting of the election committee last year, was also fairly clearly the what was publicly said in the meeting and what Peter has just said is the idea that the committee members don't recruit candidates, they don't endorse candidates, nothing like that. Instead, it's sort of this more general thing. So that was the sort of the history there. So just to separate, just so that there isn't confusion, clarifying what's said there. Yep, go ahead, Andrew.
Just real quickly, Peter, so you're saying just committee members, not council members, as part of?
Actually, I believe the council members really should not be.
Yeah, I mean, I had a long, as everyone knows here, I had a long conversation with Susan, and she checked with Ron, and there was absolutely nothing wrong, legally speaking, for her to do that. You know, there's freedom of speech. I mean, all these issues. I mean, to me, it was appearance. She knows how I felt about it. You know, we figured all this out. But I do agree that you know, you take on this volunteer job, not to kind of undermine your own ability to speak your mind, but you have to just recognize that there are certain limitations, maybe appearance wise, ethics wise. So, you know, just immediate thoughts.
Right. I think just to sort of go back to something just that Peter said, just to add something, just for something to for the committee to think about, which is from past elections, which is that Ron has also stated in the past, which is that you are allowed to do slates. So if people agree to be on slates together, that is something that is permissible and has happened in the past. Again, I don't know, I wasn't here, but that's the legal understanding. So the question of how council members can or can't endorse gets into a different question, which is this question of if they run on a slate together, how does that impact? Right? So I'm just bringing this not to disagree, but to just put out on everyone's thoughts what the different avenues this goes down to, again, to Andrew's point about freedom of speech and how you can run and things like that, versus the committee, where the committee you can fairly easily structure that it says, no, you can't endorse, you can't recruit, you just have to send out information. So there's two different divisions, and I just wanted to put that also on your radar.
Okay, so first, I think all of the comments so far have focused on the question of the committee. None of the comments have focused on the committee. I think that it's pretty clear, you know, that everybody accepts that that the role of the committee members is not to be an advocate.
Mm-hmm.
As to the council members, I think, you know, of course we all have freedom of speech, but it's not always wise to speak. And, you know, what is legal is not necessarily the same as what's ethically reasonable. So, you know, my view with respect to council members is that council members may be recommending somebody to the larger public based on the self-interest of the council member, and may use the prestige of being on the council to unduly weight the value of that recommendation. So, you know, we all have self-interest, of course, involved to one degree or another. I think, you know, the committee members have a direct, the council members have a direct set of, they have their own agenda of what they'd like to see the council do, who they'd like to serve with on the council, and so on. So I'm not taking a position on the issue of slates, and I guess I need to think about that more. But I think in general, I think it does not serve voters well for council members to endorse. But you know, we can vote on each of these if you'd like. Okay.
So so just so that so George has his hand up. I don't know if you want to speak now or how you want.
I'm sorry. Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like as a bullet for relating to committee members, I think that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. That's just kind of good practice. For the council members, I think that gets into a deeper discussion about what we can and cannot, like kind of where we can and cannot with the difference between endorsing, I think, and soliciting, because the soliciting part gets into a really tricky one where it's, how are we going to be able to prove that someone did that? Whereas the endorsements, I think that much more easily falls into something where we have some historical jurisdiction. I don't know if that would back up, from conversation with Ron, but where it's the things relating to where we've governed in the past, what is and is not eligible to be printed in election materials, where you could say,
like,
yeah, we already say you can't imply that you are endorsed by the village, but we could put a few more restrictions, I think, on what can and cannot be an election material, whereas the soliciting side, I think, with council members gets a lot trickier, because then it gets into enforcement, and it gets into that very much becomes free speech, and what's the line between someone saying, oh, I think you could be good on the council, versus, well, I think you should apply for the council, kind of thing. Like that. That for me gets much more of a kind of a trouble spot than maybe governing kind of what can and can't go into election materials for council stuff, which again, get fully on board with committee side stuff and having that kind of stuff in place.
Interesting.
Yeah. So let's just hang on. I know Alex had his hand up, so I'm just going to let him, just because he's on the ethics committee. So, and we have 2 people from the ethics committee, so they might want to weigh.
Thanks. I mean, this is obviously a subject that relates to my candidacy for the council, and so I have 2 kind of points of view, which is my personal experience, and then as from the ethics committee point of view. Starting from my personal experience, I feel like the risk here is really overstated. The benefits are not represented. There are many examples where I, as a non-candidate, would really appreciate the guidance of somebody who spends a lot of time on the council and knows the difference between a good candidate or a bad candidate. And that endorsement would mean a lot to me were I not really paying attention or did not have the energy to pay attention. And removing the ability for endorsement, I think, hurts the village in that respect, right? There are many people that I very much respect on the council, and their opinion I would very much value. So I think that's a big risk, a big benefit to take away. Peter, the ethics, I guess, challenge would be dealt with through the ethics process, right? If there was some, collusion to directly benefit council member, which is clearly in violation of the ethics standards, then that goes through the ethics process. But I feel like that's quite different from just endorsement of candidacy, right? That is now the application of, of the position of the council being exercised to someone's specific benefit. I think the election to the council is not actually a benefit at all. It's in fact quite a burden. It takes a lot of time. It is not compensated. It's odd to me that it would be represented as something that somebody would, benefit from, in general. So those would be my sort of 2 positions or 2 opinions on it.
To the best of my knowledge, last year was the first time that this happened. And certainly in my memory, in my experience in the village, over the last, whatever it is, 17, 18 years. And so, I think it hasn't been the traditional practice. And so I think we have to think carefully about whether we want to endorse moving in that direction or not.
It's certainly not, an automatic path to council, positions. It's,
And I appreciate what Alex has to offer too. I come from the same vantage point, just having run this past election, and I would just offer insights, maybe not speaking as a council member, but as a resident who ran 3 times, and the 3rd time was finally the charm. I ran against a strong slate, and I didn't appreciate that experience, and so I'm not for slates, and I'm not for council endorsements. That's my position as a resident and someone who ran 3 times.
And the reason that you're against council endorsements, could you explain that more fully?
Well, I think that you're a body of 5, so you should be 5 minds. And, when we look at issues, we shouldn't think in blocks and voting blocks. We should be thinking in 5 different representatives. So when you team up, I don't really, we're not a party system. We should be 5 individuals representing the village. That's how I've looked at it. And that's how I feel when I look at issues and ordinances and that the council faces. Sometimes I might agree with Andrew and sometimes I won't. And sometimes I agree with Susan and sometimes I won't. I think that should be the purpose of the council, 5 individual minds.
Maybe we can get the Washington Post editorial board to weigh in on these so that folks can be informed versus a council member.
All right, well, you're welcome to ask them.
Yeah.
I personally won't be doing that,
But you're right. An endorsement by a council member doesn't ensure a straight path to a council seat. But I do think to levy the playing field and people who are putting themselves out there, I don't really think it's fair to have endorsements from council members. That's my opinion.
yeah, I find myself, thinking along the same lines as you. So I think let's hold off on that for the time being, and we can think about it, and maybe we'll have a vote later in the meeting. Second ethical idea here is that the committee welcomes all nominees equally, verifies that they meet the statutory requirements, and provides timely information and standard administrative assistance to every candidate. In other words, the committee should be unbiased among candidates. We are in the business of providing a service to the village, not ourselves directing or manipulating election outcomes. The charter states that, quote, any qualified voter may run for council, and to provide uneven treatment would be a way of denying them that right. That's my view. So any discussion on that? But that's our role, and I think that's pretty straightforward.
I think that should be the main goal.
Yes, I agree. Third, members of the election committee shall not endorse or recommend any specific candidate, even in private conversations with neighbors. No election committee member can sponsor a candidate campaign event, distribute campaign flyers, or otherwise give the appearance of publicly supporting any candidate. Any election committee member who has a family connection or a business or personal relationship with a candidate should notify the committee as soon as the nominations are received and may be asked to step off the election committee to avoid the perception of a conflict of interest. And I think the thinking here is that it's important to avoid both actual bias and the appearance of possible bias in the way that elections are managed. I think endorsing people obviously gives the impression that we are not doing that. So that's my view. Any thoughts among all of you? Okay, fourth, all procedural requests from the candidates must be openly and fairly considered on the basis of their objective electoral merits and the potential benefit to the voters, without regard as to which candidate made the request. All decisions about election procedures must take place in open public committee meetings. Regulatory procedures cannot be adopted behind closed doors. Any election committee member who violates the Open Meetings Act is subject to immediate removal from the committee for that reason. Any concerns or problems? Not that I expect anyone to fall into that. But, yes, George.
You're talking about, when you talk about not adopting behind closed doors, you're talking about like formal adoption, not development, right? Like these election committee meetings aren't necessarily working sessions where we sit and hash out the specific wording of the election plan. That's something that can happen offline, circulating drafts, but it's the decisions happen in public facing meetings, absent us having to go into a closed session for the purpose of receiving legal advice. and whatnot, which I don't think we're allowed to make decisions during closed sessions anyway, right?
No, you're not. So only
that's
closed
what I thought.
session is to receive advice or to discuss particulars of an action that that compels you to go into closed session. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I was a little thrown. I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure, but I thought we couldn't do decisions in
The
closed sessions anyway, so.
the one note, and this is just from a sort of a legal technical point of view on that one, Peter, is technically the removal or appointment of a person to a committee is the council's job. So if there is a case, so if you want to amend this, the thought would be the committee could recommend removal in such cases, but also, so that's technical point one. Then the other thing is that the violation of the Open Meetings Act is not of individuals, it's of the body. So if you violate in other words, the body violates the Open Meetings Act, not necessarily one individual. Just as a point of reference of how the act operates, it views the body as the issue, not individual members. So the entire body would violate the act, not an individual of it.
So theoretically, we could all be removed.
Right, exactly, and that's why I just wanted to put those two things out there because it's never, it's not one person, it's the body. So that's the way that the act interprets it. Just so that you're aware.
Okay, that's good to know.
Mhm.
Okay, any other thoughts on this one? We're going to be working later on the VMA election packet, the set of rules that will guide the election process. It requires public notices about the election in the form, voting instructions, and the candidate statements. It's unethical for the election committee to alter the candidate statements in any way. They must be published as submitted. And I think this is basic fairness to the candidates collectively. To edit, improve, or diminish a candidate statement is unfair to the voters and to the other candidates. Deprives voters of information about the skills of the candidate and may advantage or disadvantage the candidate whose statements we might manipulate. This has no place in the activities of the committee or its members. Any thoughts? Okay. 6.
Hey, Peter, it's Tiffany Cisna. I have my hand raised, but I don't know
sorry.
if you guys are.
Yeah.
I can't see you. Oh. Go ahead, Tiffany.
I just wanted to toss a practical piece there. As far as changing the words of the candidates, my experience agree wholeheartedly. I think when we're publishing things in the past,
right.
When we're producing things online, in order to have them actually come out looking uniform, I guess, for the village or in a readable way on technology that folks are reading, we would stipulate that things would come in like via text or whatever, so that when they were dumped into Constant Contact or something else, and Miles can explain better about the formatting issues that are there. I don't know if that's, I just wanted to add a question for clarification. Obviously, changing words should never happen, but the idea that the village might have to put it into a format that will be formatable to disseminate is, I wanted to make sure that was on your radar.
As long as all candidates are treated equally, I don't see a problem with it.
So that's where I would, I'm just going to jump into 2 seconds because I figured I didn't see this as being an issue with this statement, but I will speak to it in this sense. The idea is simply that what the committee could do is provide specific formatting things that all the candidates have to follow. So you have to submit it in Word. You have to submit it, with the understanding that there are certain things, like set of, just general things to do it, because that way we then could tell them all of the statements will be in Georgia 16, which is what I do every time with the weekly wrap up and with the newsletter. That way, no one is, one, treated any differently, but two, so that everybody knows that the one piece of manipulation usually is we're going to put it into a format that is readable by most devices. Because the problem that I've found with Constant Contact is if you don't do that, some stuff gets screwed up. So you just have to have the format correct, and we could just stipulate in advance what the format will be, and then everybody knows that that's what it will be. And so that's one way of dealing with those questions. Is what I was thinking. So
I think that sounds good. Any other comments? Okay, number 6, we're halfway through. Committee shall maintain strict neutrality in conducting the election forum, accept all forum questions that residents submit without censorship, and provide a way to submit questions anonymously. No candidate may see the questions in advance, and all the candidates must have an equal opportunity to respond to the questions at the forum according to the committee's written forum procedure. Obviously, we haven't yet written. Yes, George.
So the one that I would potentially raise a red flag on is asking every question that is submitted, because I think it gets a little bit to, in my experience last year moderating the forum, if you treat it almost like you do with the candidate statements, where if you lay out these are the criteria we're looking for from questions, because last year I can say we got a lot of questions. Using all of them, one would have just been impractical from a time perspective. I think the forums last year were all pretty long already, and we didn't use a lot of questions. There's a lot of duplicates where it's 4 versions of the same question, even if the wording's a little different.
Right.
And then the last one that's problematic with that was, and I can just speak from experience last year, we got a lot of questions that were directed at one person. And that runs into in our mind, and in my mind, developing the questions ran into a little bit of a fairness thing, because it's going to be 15 questions for one candidate, and then the other candidates each get to answer 4 questions. And so then and you don't want the question to be candidate A, what is your response to this question? Candidate B, respond to candidate A's answer. And so I think I'm in agreement that, it's asking as many questions as is practical, and asking questions that follow the general guidance that we gave last year, which was, questions should be, 1, questions, not statements. That there were a handful in there that were just statements that were basically, and then 2, questions that are applicable to all candidates, kind of thing. And I think if we go off that guidance, then that gets a lot more doable. But just asking every single question, I think starts running into just some logistical and practical issues.
So do you mean that individual candidates should never be asked a question individually?
I think it gets into some timing and fairness stuff. I think there's one where, and I can, so without, going too much into detail last year, basically what we did is there were a lot of questions that were geared at one specific candidate that related a lot to some language that was used in some of the campaign marketing and things like that. What we were able to do is, okay, instead of these 10 questions directed at one candidate that no one else would have gotten to talk for an hour, we basically tried to suss out what is, what's the core of what this is asking, and then repurpose it into a question that in that case, all 6 candidates could answer. Because it's otherwise asking individual questions, it starts running into that fair time. And if you don't have an individual question for each of the 6 candidates, it starts running into some problems.
I think the general practice in the past has been that questions that relate to the same subject may be consolidated into a single question. And I think that would be true with candidates, with questions directed to a single candidate as well. I think in general, yes, the practice should be to have generally applicable questions. If there's a burning issue relating to one person, I would not want to rule that out. However, as to answering all questions, of course, that's not going to be possible. I think consolidation of questions on similar subjects or related subjects can be very helpful. And if we run out of time, I don't think that's a matter of fairness. I think the real issue here is, discrimination based on, hard questions, questions that, may, we want to address. We want to allow certain questions, but not others. And make every effort to ask every question, at least in a consolidated form with other questions. In other words, we should not be censoring
Right.
the flow of questions.
I did want to address just one other thing, and this is again the technical stuff about receiving questions anonymously, which you also had as that part. And the key thing there is to say is that you can, during the forum, say, you know, we're not going to use people's names of who submitted questions, but we can't necessarily guarantee anonymity of the people asking the question. The only reason why I say that is under the Open Meetings Act, or sorry, under the Public Information Act. If somebody submitted a question and then in an email, right, that who's that from and who it's to, right, are not protected under the Public Information Act. So you could get an redacted sort of version of that, right? So the committee and the council cannot guarantee your anonymity. But that being said, the committee also isn't under any obligation to say, with lacking that request, who's doing it. Like during the forum yourself, you don't have to say who said it. You just said, "Here's the question." That doesn't apply to questions that are submitted, via paper, where somebody just submits it under a door, or over the phone. Again, you don't have to keep those type of records. It's just when people are submitting questions via email, where under the act you can't necessarily guarantee their anonymity.
Right.
That being said, you also don't have to say in the forum who said what, right, or who asked what. Sorry.
Right. I think it's obvious that if you stand up in the forum
Yeah.
and ask a question, you're waiving
Yes.
any claim to anonymity.
Yeah. But
all that I'm saying is that there should be a way for people to ask
Mhm.
with a reasonable assurance of anonymity, if that's what they want.
Right.
Not that it's the only way to ask questions.
No. Yeah.
But I think that many people in the village would be much more prone to participate in this if, in fact, they could be assured that in fact, they are anonymous. And I think
Right.
we have to develop. I don't think that we know exactly how that's to be done.
Right.
But it doesn't seem impossible to me to do.
No, not right. No, and what I meant by say to the committee doesn't have to, when they're asking the question of candidates, they don't have to say who submitted it. It's more of a technical question around emails in the Public Information Act. That's all that I'm just letting out there, so that we don't tell people something that is or isn't true. If that makes sense. Like,
okay.
That's all. All right.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's see. Number 7, the election committee shall ensure ballot security, voter privacy, and the integrity of the election. The committee is responsible for verifying and certifying the annual VMA voter roll, tallying the votes correctly, with or without the assistance of an election services contractor, certifying the final election data, and reporting the accurate and complete voting results to the community. These are, I think, our basic responsibilities in which all can participate this year and beyond without fear of loss of privacy or security. Seems straightforward to me. Any concerns? Okay. Number 8.
Oh, go ahead, George. Sorry,
Yeah,
George.
The stuff with certifying the voter roll, this is actually more of a question for Niles. Niles, I know we kind of went through this a little bit last year about where exactly responsibility for that lies, and I want to make sure we're not accidentally usurping and trying to claim as a committee something that is established in statute is supposed to be someone else.
So it is. So first of all, from a statutory point of view, there is no statutory requirement about who's the custodian of the voter roll per se. There's a separate question. There's a separate related question about village records and whose records are available, right? So, for example, under the county voter roll is a and the village voter roll are both public records, and so anybody can request access to it. And 2 residents requested for the voter roll last year. So by that standard, right, anybody can sort of look at the voter roll. in terms of certifying the accuracy of the voter roll, right? This gets into a much more complicated thing, and this is something that I do want to talk to the committee about. Who certifies it, as I said, is not set forth by statute, so the committee could say, you know, we will review the voter roll and say, yes, this is accurate to the best of our knowledge. One of the ways that we could do this, and one of the ways that I've been thinking about, is how to use the county voter roll, which we receive, our own records, which are primarily in constant contact. I like to keep everything in that. And then utilizing those two resources in a slightly different way than we've done in the past. For example, saying things like, if you are on the county voter roll, you are on the village voter roll. Like, this is what we did in Rockville. Rockville just used the county voter roll and then had a separate list of people who don't qualify, either didn't qualify under the county voter roll, but did for the city of Rockville. And we have a situation like that. Under a qualified voter in the village just has to own property and be of the correct age, basically. So that means that, for example, you don't have to be an American citizen to vote in the village, but you do have to be an American citizen to vote for the county. And we have a couple of instances of that in the village that I know of, and so therefore we could maintain a list of those people versus a list of using the county list to sort of check our work, and that sort of reduces it. There's two other advantages for utilizing the county voter roll. Just give me 1 second, Natalie, and then you can ask your question. One is that you can sign up for the county voter roll online, and you can check whether you're on the voter roll online, which allows for there to be less ambiguity. There are issues with a county voter roll, I will say. One, the county voter roll sometimes has people who actually don't live in the village. Their address, meaning their house, isn't in the village, but is in the county voter roll, and there'd be a process for which we could go through and certify that. And also, the county and the state, and this is what we ran into a lot when I was doing a vote by mail election in Rockville, is that under state and county law, it is fairly difficult to remove someone from a voter roll because you have to, they have to tell you to take them off. They won't take someone off the voter roll just because it's been a number of years or it's been X or it's been Y. The state has a very clear mandate in terms of you basically have to request it, with the exception of the county sends an official postage, and if you don't reply to it within a certain number of times, I think it's like 3, then you get taken off. So it's a very high burden, whereas we could do something that's less stringent. We have the right to make our voter roll how we want it, and we could have it where all that's required is an email saying you no longer live in the village and I don't want to be a voter. Or when people move out, we just ask them, tell them, with your permission, we'll take you off the voter roll. That type of thing to satisfy that requirement. And then to add people is also directly from the person and things like that. But if we're focusing on the county voter roll, we could also supply the link that says, hey, you can register to vote here, and that helps. And that's what we did in Rockville. So that's the long and the short of certifying the voter roll as a committee function. We could certainly do it. We could just do it in such a way that we're farming out the work in a way to the county, and then also our list of people who we know aren't on the county list and for various reasons. So that's a long answer, and Natalie, what's your thoughts now?
No, I was just saying, it's not just property owners, if you're a tenant. So
yes,
a house could have the owner voting plus the tenant voting.
Yes.
So,
and yeah, and that's also the resident part of the, I glossed over, but Natalie's right. Tenants can also be voters. There are also voters under the Montgomery County. Montgomery County doesn't, in fact, Montgomery County says all you have to be is of age, an American citizen, and a resident. It doesn't have this stuff about property owners, which is something for that. So, and then, hang on 1 second.
We also don't have a time limit on how long you have lived here to be able to vote.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So if you moved in 20 minutes before the
Right.
election, you're still eligible.
And since the state now has same day voter registration, it doesn't either. You just so it's like various different things about that. So
Right. Well, I think, obviously we're looking at the EMA requirements rather than
yeah,
the county requirements.
but utilizing that resource is a way of potentially helping us do our job a little bit better. But
Yes, I can understand
yeah.
that.
I'm just gonna. I think Tiffany had one other thing to say. Since she
I just wanted to share, for last year being an election committee member, and seeing the amount of work that Niles had to do to verify and cross-verify the voter roll, that is a tremendous amount of work that took quite a bit of time as well as quite a bit of access to information. And I think I was grateful that we had followed the same process that had been established by the committee the year before, when I was on the council, that had the staff doing the work of putting together the voter roll. And obviously he can share with you guys more information about that. But again, just the amount of the time and energy and the access to the information needed to do the verification was significant, very significant.
And go to Natalie's point. I ended up checking every household in the village vis-a-vis the property tax records, so that we made sure we were covering all those people as well. So that's another data source, but it's just how can we streamline the process? I think.
Fair enough.
Oh yeah.
I have a question. I just wondered, I mean, could interns ever help, like for SSL hours? I mean, like being a local,
right,
government student of AU, University of Maryland, or high school students for SSL hours. I mean, could they help with you, like help you with records? Like, could we get you an intern? I mean, I don't know. Like, would that help?
So we could do something like that. Martha did. I will say that Martha did a ton of work, both on the directory and on the voter roll at the same time, because we were doing both at the same time in 2020, and then in 2021 it was just the voter roll. It's just I think that's something that we can look into. The main concern there, the main issue, and this is again separating between public records questions and how we talk to residents about this stuff, is access to people's privacy. There are people who do not want people to know personal information about them, their phone numbers, their emails, and stuff like that. And so that's where staff, can serve that purpose of certain people don't want their information known, and so therefore the staff kind of keeps that to themselves. Now, under the Public Records Act, their stuff is public information, as we just talked about, but we just try to respect their privacy as much as possible if it's not germane to the action. And so, and that's less of a legal thing, that's more trying to be respectful of people's times. So if we had an intern, or if we did something like that, we would just have to be respectful of some of the sensitivities around it, but that's a staffing thing. That's not a committee function. I'm just putting all that out there just to say that we can sort of work through how we want to do it to streamline the process a little bit, but also make it sure that we're respecting everything that we have to. So, all right. All right, perfect.
I know that doing the voter roll is going to be a lot of work. I think that the committee members can participate in that process and should participate. We're very, very lucky to have you to provide staff help in doing this as well.
But it's and we can figure out how we want to do this, whether it's a review at a certain point. Like, for example, the county, what the county does in giving us the voter roll is they give us the county voter roll twice. Once at really the beginning of the election period, and once closer to the election, so that changes that have been made, people who've updated their their status and things like that, they tell us to do it again, and so that's a separate check, and so we can work in those deadlines as well when we're developing these things. So, as an example,
And there are block captains as well.
there are block captains. You know, and that gets into this question, which is more technical, but into that question of, can the block captains help specifically with telling people, hey, if you just moved in, you can get registered to vote, that kind of thing. Where it gets a little bit trickier is that question of removing people, because like even in Rockville, we, like as Rockville staff, we couldn't remove people from the county voter roll, even if we knew like this person had died. You know, and so the question of, and we can, as I said, set up our own rules, but maybe how we do that, of whether we have a procedure of contacting next of kin or something like that to confirm that this person isn't there, is just part of it, just to be respectful again of people's right to vote in that sense.
Well, those are you know, helpful insights.
Yeah, and
I think that doesn't really go to the principle, but when it comes time to work on the voter roll,
oh yeah, and I've
you know, we will have to you know, be very careful how we do that.
And I've sort of have a draft of something that I can submit at some point. I had some edits that I wanted to make, and I was going to try to send it to Andrew, but I haven't gotten a chance yet, just to get a sense from the staffing side of it. But I'll get that soon, and then when it comes to that time, we can present it to the committee to do it, because I wanted just a second set of eyes. All right.
Okay. Anything else, George?
I mean, we kind of functionally have to do this at some point anyway, like just by nature of, if it's an in-person election, there has to be the printed voter roll that you're checking people in against. And if it's a mail-in election like last year, that one we did have, it's a pre-deadline of the voter roll was locked on a certain date, just simply from the logistics of, this is the date as of this time, this is the roll is locked, because we need to be able to mail people their ballots. So I think, like, functionally, we're going to have to do this anyway. I think it might just be a terminology question of if we're calling it, we're certifying the voter roll versus we're accepting and agreeing this is the voter roll we're using
as of this date,
for the election. I think it might just be a terminology issue.
My understanding is that it's the function of the committee to verify and certify the voter roll, and staff are certainly able to assist in compiling the voter roll and trying to make sure it's as accurate as possible. Ultimately, though, you know, it is our responsibility.
Just to clarify, that has not been the case for at least the past 2 years in Martin's edition.
What has not been the case exactly?
The committee has not written, drafted, created the voter roll. But if you go back and look at the last 2 election committee procedures, I think the language was something like maintaining, drafting, etc. was the staff.
And I have the language from the 2019 one up, and I think that's what has been used, and that's the committee will utilize the most recent electronically available village qualified voter contact information to verify residents' names and addresses. So I think the previous rules have talked about us utilizing it, but I don't know if they've described that. So if that is something that the committee decides we want to take on and make officially our responsibility, I think that's something we're going to have to call out separately, because I don't think that's something that has been enshrined previously.
Well, it hasn't been formally enshrined. I think. But I think the practice up until the last 2 years, as Tiffany points out, has been the committee's responsibility. And it is a major responsibility, and getting that right, we have to rely on as reliable information as we possibly can, and obviously we need all the help we can get.
And and we can discuss more how we want to do this and all of that stuff. But Natalie had her hand up.
It just,
Oh, I'm
in
sorry.
the past, when we had, in-house voting instead of
Mhm.
mail-in voting, we would check off as people, came to vote. And those who were not on the rolls, they had to produce like a driver's license, proof that they actually lived at ABC,
And
whatever.
and we did that just as another point of emphasis. We did that with also vote by mail stuff. So people would show me a picture of their driver's license to say, yes, I am the person I say to be. And then, through that, I would update it and then have the vendor in that case mail them out a ballot, right? Because there's a vote by mail one.
Right.
But how we want to communicate that, or how the committee wants to fall in line with that, that's how we can determine, and the method can determine some of this stuff too. So but again, that's getting into the weeds of this stuff too.
Yes, I think so. I think we're a little ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
Okay, two more. Number 9, all candidates are entitled to compete on a level playing field without an undue insider advantage for incumbents. Council members who are up for re-election in a given year should not serve as the council liaison to the election committee, and former council members should take a hiatus of at least 1 year before serving on the election committee. So again, I think this is a question of both actual bias, potential actual bias, and the public perception of bias and independence in the election process. And to me, it seems straightforward. Any thoughts?
Not sure about the former. I mean, the current for sure. I agree with that. That's why we have it set up the way it is right now, not by statute. But Katie and I discussed, and we discussed with other council members that, especially on ethics and elections, it should probably be the council members not running for re-election during this cycle. But former, I'm not sure. I mean,
Yeah, council members who are up for re-election in a given year is the way I wrote this. Should not.
yeah, but didn't you say, and former council members should take a year-long hiatus?
Yes, I did. To separate them from, their involvement in particular issues and efforts to move the council in one direction or another.
And just to go back, just not to beat a drum here, but that's the question that goes to a question of appointments, and that's a question for the council rather than the committee, because the appointment power is the council. So if the council want to make that rule that you can recommend it. I'm not saying not to do it, but just to create who does what where.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, I mean, this goes to a point, Peter, that I'm going to make when you're done with your last point. Just something else in terms of adopting these items for the committee. So why don't we let you finish, and then I'll raise one issue.
Okay. And number 10, the village charter and longstanding practices in VMA have established a firewall. Council approves the overall election procedures, but takes a hands-off approach to the elections themselves. By long tradition, the council members and staff do not endorse candidates, alter public election notices, handle ballots, get involved in the vote counting, or otherwise become involved with the independent management of the election. To maintain public confidence in the integrity of VMA elections, the election committee affirms the ethical importance of the firewall as a matter of good public policy. So I guess that goes to the issue you raised before. Yeah, George.
So, accepting council members endorsing, because that's a conversation we already started having, and I think, move to the parking lot, address another time. Is that something that's been a concern in the past, that we're separately kind of delineating? Like, isn't that pretty thoroughly covered under?
I think the
ethics
issue never really arose.
That the council can't fiddle with the elections.
Yeah.
And also, I would imagine Maryland state law that they can't interfere with elections.
Well, the idea is that we're a little more distanced from the electoral issues. Where our concern is with the with the election process and not with all of the other things that the council may be considering that may, excuse me, that may drive the way the council is may react to the election process. So either the attempt to put themselves in a better position or to advantage people who support them or disadvantage people who don't support them. I think having that firewall is advantageous from that point of view. Yes, I do believe that.
I'm not questioning the benefit of the firewall. I'm more questioning whether or not separately articulating it is, one, addressing something that has kind of come up in the past, and two, whether or not that's not something that already exists. Basically, like, we're not creating kind of a potentially conflicting and confusing one with the existing ethics guidance, that we're not creating something that's going to be related to, but kind of voicing a slightly different way of putting it for existing Maryland election law and things like that. Obviously the council shouldn't be getting involved in fiddling with things to try and, to their advantage, to someone's disadvantage, to reflect their own personal, peak. It's just more of making sure that this isn't something that's going to be overlapping and interfering with existing guidance that's already constraining council members, that I don't know if we want to be in a position where we're creating a kind of separate regulatory.
So, I think that goes to the question of what is the purpose of this list of ethical ideas, and I think it's really to guide the committee, first of all, and secondly, to take a position that can be observed by the rest of the world. Of course, if the council chooses to interfere in the election, I'm not sure that we have any recourse there, but we're stating a position that this is how we believe elections should be ethically run, and that their involvement is not appropriate. And so that's it's not like we're mandating or enacting a law. We are not asking the council to endorse this. This is an act of the committee, and in that sense, I think it's fair for the committee to take a position on keeping ourselves in a position where the results of the committee's work will produce an election that is as fair and equal opportunity and unbiased and uninfluenced by inappropriate outside factors as we possibly can. That's our goal. We are simply presenting this to the outside world, including the council and to the residents, as the way we believe the committee should be run, and the values that should guide the committee in its actions.
So if I could just, a couple of things, Peter. First of all, I think you did a great job here in delineating some of the priorities on the ethical front. I think it would be helpful for the committee, in order for the committee to adopt these, for you to share these in writing with everyone, and the committee can take a vote, I guess, to adopt these principles or these guiding ethical principles. Yes. They do sound to me a little bit like procedural or policy-wise, something that will regulate in many ways the committee. And so my question is, and this is maybe a Ron Bolt question, if that in fact is the case, if these are guiding procedures for the committee, would the council have to adopt them in order for the committee to proceed based on those? So kind of formalizing it in that respect. So that's a question. I don't know the answer. That's maybe Ron, Niles. We can consult Ron on that.
Oh no, I can consult with Ron. I will say that that if it's something, so under the way that the structure is supposed to be, is that the council is, as council appointees and as the body of the council, basically devolved from the council, how you're supposed to operate is supposed to be approved by the council, in the sense that as the code talks about and as the charter talks about, the guidelines and procedures, right? So how you conduct yourself, the council is supposed to oppose. Now, how you, if you want to say like how the council or how the committee, these ideals that you want to uphold, that might be slightly different, and that's why there's two things between, you know, dealing with things like the appointment power, which is very clearly a council prerogative, versus ideals that you want to, you know, behaving ethically in those type of ones where it says, you know, committee members won't do this, as a sort of we're all agreeing amongst ourselves to it. That's slightly different, where it's like, or at least that's my broad interpretation. Again, I would say have Ron, and I can call him first thing in the morning.
Like holding ourselves to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And that seems like these 10 points are
Yeah.
getting, right?
Yeah.
To a higher standard, that's one thing. But formalizing it in a way that the committee proceeds and you know, enforces or regulates itself or the process, I think might need to be more formalized through the adoption of committee and council. But anyway, so that either way, Peter, I think it's great. I'd love to see them written down, and I don't know if going along with that question, whether this is like an a la carte menu, if it's, you know, all or nothing, or if you know, the committee goes through these and there's some, you know, disagreement, so you have to maybe amend or strike. I think it's a great exercise and really appreciate you.
Well, I will send them out to the committee committee at the end of this meeting or the next day or two. You know, I would be happy to review them again next week and make decisions about what we want to adopt and what we don't. I think this is a good set of rules. I think it will work well in guiding the committee to get the best possible vote and election process. And I would like to see the committee be guided by this in terms of whether the council wants to adopt it, whether there's any enforcement mechanism. I'm not proposing an enforcement mechanism. I think there may come a point if somebody really is out of bounds where we ask a person to remove themselves from the committee. I don't anticipate that will happen at all. But I think it's just helpful for us to lay out right up front, the kind of behavior that we need to see from the council, from the committee. That's all it is. Yes, George.
So I think I got a little thrown because you used two different ways of describing it. One was kind of like a voicing of these are the principles we want to follow, and then you also described it as these are rules that we're following. And I think just as I'm going through them, and I appreciate you pulling all this together, I think that's just one where I would like to just kind of hear your thoughts on what the role is, just because I think there's somewhere some of the language to me, it started coming across a little bit as procedures, rules in place where that's something that would be better addressed by the council or would be already addressed by the existing ethics guidance that is out there, and making sure that we're not tweaking that in a way where there's an ethical standard that has already been put out and agreed to by the council and that the ethics committee is operating under, and we're doing a slightly tweaked version of that could potentially create confusion. So I think that's just kind of where.
Okay. Well, I did not mean to create something that is procedurally enforceable, where there are, where there's going to be some kind of trial or some kind of procedure that would force somebody off. The council did create an ethics ordinance, so if that situation does arise, that is a method, that could be adopted to address that. But it's not necessarily the case. But I think I meant really to give guidance as to, what the committee is about, what standards we want to hold ourselves to in our behavior, and the belief that this is what we really have been appointed to do, is to create the best and cleanest and fairest possible election And I think, questions will come up throughout the process as to, what does this mean? But I think that this is a guidepost that.
By the way, Peter, I think this could be a mix of that. It could be kind of the guiding principles, but there could be other stuff that you think that the committee members feel like need to be enforced and be part of the procedure of the committee that would then have to go to the council to adopt. So that gray area in the future. I mean, it could totally be a mix of those items in those 10 that you listed. That's up to you guys and future conversations as well.
Okay,
And I also think, in addition to things set up to the committee, I think some of it is also things that would wind up, in my mind, just a little more naturally fitting into the election plan that is put out. So things like, we are publishing the candidate statements in full, parentheses, as they comply with the things. That's something that to me is a little bit more of a technical one that would make more sense. That's in the election plan that we're putting out before we even know who the candidates are. And it's enshrined there where that is a technical bit of how we're administering the election that would be put into that, whereas some of the other principles are more of, this is the code of conduct we're agreeing to, as opposed to, things in the election plan or the appointment standards that do need to naturally rise up to the council.
Right. So I will be sending this out to you, as I say, in the next few days. Let's look at it. Let's think about, how we can best use this or how it should be construed. And if it should move, beyond the committee in terms of, going to the council for some kind of endorsement or not. Next thing I want to do before we adjourn for the evening is I want to go through the timing of the election process. And I think it's pretty straightforward. I'm sure a lot of you are already pretty familiar with it. But the truth is, that we have, this is a big job. This is, I think, maybe the hardest working of the committees. There's a lot to do over the course of an entire year. And so, I think it's important that we move quickly. So I want to lay out, the tasks and that are ahead of us in the election process and the timeline required to complete that process. So let's see. How can I share my screen?
I'll allow you to. Hang on one second.
Okay.
And then go there, and then you should be able to hit share screen. It should work. If it doesn't, let me know.
Okay, let's see here. Whoops. I'm not sure about this. Let's see. Okay. Sure. Okay. Can everybody see this?
It hasn't come up yet, so
I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong.
okay. If you want to just quickly email it to me, I can share it from my screen, and then we can do it that way.
Okay.
So
hi, Niles.
yeah.
Also, there's a question in the chat too. I don't know if you
we can deal with that in just a second. So let's just first
While Niles is getting that set up, I did have one comment I wanted to add on following up on one last thing about kind of the principles you laid out, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So one of the things you talked about was making it as easy as possible to vote and ensuring all votes are counted if possible. I think we're in good position because as part of my work last year and this year, I did go look back through I think we have committee reports dating back to decently far on the website. I think 2015 on the website and then serving last year. And the committee reports are generally pretty good about delineating how many votes that were submitted were not counted. I know just from our personal notes and the public reporting of how many total votes there were last year. There were 400 and something votes last year. that were total cast, and I think we only wound up with 4 that weren't, and hopefully we have the reasons why those weren't counted, so we can, as part of the effort to count all of the valid votes counted, I think that the reasoning is helpfully captured elsewhere, so we can hopefully do whatever we can to build in the structures of the voter education or making the rules as clear as possible to make sure that everyone who is submitting one, we're not running into anything where their intent is to cast a good ballot, but they, owing to one reason or another, filled in 3 bullets. Or I know in 2018, I think there were a handful of people who filled in 2 candidates and a write-in, and so their ballots get disqualified. And so I think hopefully having all of that, and the numbers are small enough that we can be pretty concerted about making sure we're tailoring to address the concerns that are out there about what ballots in the past have not been counted, so we can try and, I mean, I would love to think we get 100% of the ballots that come in are all good and valid. I think, you know, maybe that's the optimist in me, but hopefully we can eliminate any potential issues that have come up in the past and try and limit the number of things that could potentially cause that this year, or hopefully going forward as well.
Okay, fair enough.
I haven't seen an email yet,
Yes,
Peter. Okay.
I'm trying to.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure in case you had sent it. I didn't mean to. Yeah.
No, that's not it. I'm sorry. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay. All right. So while that is doing, I guess we will. We can address Alex's question right now. So he asked. Here's Peter's email. He asked. These would be, meaning the principles, whatever gets shared with the minutes for general resident review as well. And so generally, this goes to another question related to the minutes. Generally speaking, oh crap. More apps. So the Peter, what you sent was in Pages. Is there any chance you can send it in Word, or can you copy and paste the text into a email?
Okay, I'll do that.
All right. Let me try to open it in Word, and we'll see what happens. But I'm just not sure it will translate correctly. We shall see. It's not. It's not liking it to.
Okay, so let me send another email.
All right, sounds good. But to answer the question that Alex wrote, is usually when there's documentation that is expressed, we share that as documents for the committee, whether it be in an agenda packet at some point or in the minutes packet or on the website. So in some form or another, you know, if there's a formal document that Peter wants to do, that can be gets circulated and approved, that will be added to the site. So, sorry. Yes, Lori?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Peter, I saw ethics on the agenda, and since we're working on training on the ethics committee, I wanted to come and just listen to what you all had to say. I'm just wondering if you're done talking about ethics.
Yes, I am.
You are? Okay. Well, congratulations on chairing, and good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
So
Bye-bye.
let me. So I'm going to try to share this as is. The formatting is a little bit different, but we'll see. Let me share screen. And then let's go, there we go, and then go share. And then let's make this full screen. Okay, can you all see that?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, I see it. I have to apologize about the fact that this document is in Pages. That's a surprise to me as well as you.
Yeah.
I was working on this document last night and tried to save it as I was working along in it, and realized that Microsoft was not allowing me to save it in Word. And to the best of my understanding, since I have been forced to become a subscriber to Microsoft services, I am now required to save things in their, what do you call it, cloud
Mhm.
drive, I guess.
Mhm.
And I cannot figure it out. And I really hate the idea of handing what appears to be ownership of all my documents over to Microsoft to do with as they will. So I'm a little bit concerned about the situation, and I don't completely understand it. I would love to give it to you in Word and the other documents, but at the moment, I don't seem to know how to do that.
What
So,
what I will do is after the meeting, I'll put this into Word, and then I'll share it with everybody via Word.
okay.
And that should solve the issue. If there's anything else like that, just let me know and we can work through. I know I have enough experience with Microsoft that I might be able to help you. I'm not claiming to be an IT expert, but I might be able to help you there.
That
Okay.
would be great. I would love it. All
Okay.
right. So what I'm doing here is just giving us a broad outline of the election cycle. So there are some key dates. According to the village charter,
Mhm.
the election must be no later than May 15th, 2022. And there must be at least 75 days from the opening of the nomination process to election day. And if this is going to be a mail-in election, as I would support, the date by which all ballot envelopes must be postmarked or sent would be what we're referring to as election day. So if you count back 75 days from May 15th, let's see, so that brings us to the beginning of May, and then there's 2 months behind that, so that would be, I guess, the nominations process cannot begin before approximately March 1st. And so nominations must be open no later than March 1st, 2022. Candidate submissions, in other words, the candidate statements and conflict of interest forms, must be made at least 45 days prior to the election day. In other words, approximately the end of March, depending on the date we choose as election day. And that's another matter that we haven't decided yet. This would allow time for printing of election packets and packets to be mailed, which should be mailed 35 days before election day. Anyway, public notice of candidates and statements no later than May 1st, 2022. So that's a broad outline. So I'm planning to hold a meeting next week unless there is some really serious concern about that among the members, because we really have to have an election plan ready to go to the council by November 18th, as I understand it. So I'm proposing that we meet again a week from today, November 11th, and on that date, we should discuss and vote on draft documents such as plans, timeline, ordinance, and any proposed changes to the charter if we want to make any of those, and report those to the council. We should submit the draft submit the draft documents to the council 1 week before the council's November meeting, which I believe
Is no. Yes. Let me just confirm that it's the third Thursday,
I could mute that, but I can't.
which would be November 18th, is the council meeting.
Right. Okay. So we have to submit it to the council to be on their agenda about a week before. So that's the day after our next meeting, which I guess would be November 11th. I would presume is going to be November 11th. So we really have to make decisions by that time. And I will be sending you a draft document that will be the election plan that the council will then, with their amendments, their suggested changes and so on, will ultimately, in one way or one form or another, be adopted as an ordinance by the council to guide the election process. So we present the report on November 18th to the council at the November council meeting and invite discussion. And hopefully the council will respond with comments, suggestions, prepare instructions for the election contractor, and work with VMA staff to begin the contracting process. Subsequently in November. By the December 7th meeting, We consider council suggestions and comments, incorporate changes into our proposed plans, consider vote counting procedures and election mechanics issues, and at the December 16th council meeting, we asked the council to introduce this draft ordinance, which has then incorporated their plans into, so that it can be fully enacted. At their next meeting, there's a 30-day requirement for formal approval of plans by the council. And so I'll send it to Niles before the meeting to ensure that residents receive copies in the council meeting packet. Presumably the council will then approve this final plan or ordinance at the January council meeting on January 20th. And so that is January 20th. The election cycle really begins in earnest in February. And so, there really isn't a lot of time to spare, and we really have to, we're kind of behind the curve because committee started so late. My understanding is it typically meets in September, and we didn't really begin until tonight, which is the beginning of November. So we're quite a bit behind. So we really have to, have a plan that we can propose to the council for presentation purposes, at least by the end of our next meeting. Is there any objection, by the way, to a meeting next Thursday night, November 11th, by any of the members?
Peter, it's Paul Weller. I'm chairing a Zoom meeting next Thursday evening, starting at 8 p.m. So I'm going to be I guess I'm not going to be able to be in that meeting for next Thursday anyhow.
Can we do it on Wednesday instead?
Also,
No, that's fire board.
The 11th is a federal holiday as
I
well.
see. Okay. How about Wednesday then, the 10th?
We do Tuesday night of that week, next Tuesday.
I'm fine with it.
I'm sorry, I have events on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week.
How does everybody feel about Monday?
That's fine for me.
Okay, Paul, will you be able to attend?
Yeah, I can do Monday.
Okay, George, any concerns?
I believe so.
You think you can, in other words, you think you can come?
I believe so. I'd have to double check
Okay,
my work calendar, which I don't currently have in front of me, but I believe so. And also check with my wife about the little one.
I see, okay. Okay,
So,
and Natalie?
Yeah, I can do it on Monday. But there's one other thing, is in 2022, May 15th is a Sunday.
I know it is. And so I'm
Okay,
gonna,
so we have to adjust all those other dates.
but if
I'm
you,
gonna propose, May 13th as election day.
Okay,
So it has to be before May 15th.
yeah.
yeah.
Niles,
Okay, so I just wanted to make one note about your schedule, Peter, just to say that if you present the plan and any other documents at the November meeting, the council could introduce it at that meeting. Introduction is just a step of having it as part of the official docket, which would mean that that 30 days could start earlier, and they would still be able to provide comments and feedback. So, in other words, I don't want to handicap you by saying that you can submit the documents at the November meeting. You wouldn't have to wait the intervening month necessarily the council could just introduce it. That could start the conversation, and any amendments could be made at the December meeting, and it could be adopted that night. There doesn't have to be a second round of it. In other words, to start the process, you could just introduce it in November. So just to give you a sense of how that could work.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
So what you have here, so in the schedule, is you say that you're going to present the report to the council at the November meeting, and then you have the December meeting that they introduce it, and then at the January meeting they approve it. And technically speaking, the council can just introduce your report the same night you present it. There doesn't need to be a gap of a month between it, especially because if you give the draft documents to me, next week, we put them in the packet. The public has notice of it as part of the packet. The introduction is just the step of saying, yes, we'll eventually vote on it. That eliminates this need to have 2 council meetings before approval. You can just have 1 council meeting before approval, depending on the schedule. So just putting that out there, just because your steps have it that way, that doesn't necessarily preclude it.
So we could introduce it in December.
It could be approved in December. It could be introduced in November. So that's what I'm saying. Introduction is just as the way you have it written. Introduction is just saying that the council will eventually vote on it, which triggers the 30 days. That triggers the 30 days. So just so that you're aware.
The question I had is maybe the same one Peter was asking of.
Mm-hmm.
Functionally, we need it approved at the January meeting because I think, Niles, and correct me if I'm wrong, the January meeting is the last one where if we are going with a vote by mail one, that you need to be able to get out the RFPs. So
right.
We could not present it to the council and have it introduced until the December meeting, which gives us a month and a half to work on it, as opposed to a week and a half.
Right.
And they would still be able to be approved in January, even if we are making changes between the December meeting and the January.
Sorry, yes. I wasn't thinking it that way too. Either way, you only need 1 meeting to introduce it, and then the next meeting, because if they're 30 days apart. The one caveat is that every once in a while, the meetings are closer than 30 days apart, in which case that's where that extra buffer comes in. Where, like, for example, between December 16th and January 20th, I think is more than 30 days in that case. So that way we would be fine either way there. But sometimes you have dates where 1 month it's December, like let's say it's January 20th, and the next month it's February 19th, right? That's less than 30 days. And so therefore you have to add an extra meeting into it.
Right.
So it's all down to that 30-day thing, but technically speaking, you only need 1 meeting to introduce it, and at the next meeting they can vote on it. There doesn't have to be 2 meetings before adoption. That's all the point that I'm trying to make. Is that the calendar, the 30 days just starts with introduction, and you can introduce it. There's no pre-step to introduction.
So we can introduce it on November 18th.
And it could be adopted in December. You could introduce it in December, and it be adopted in January. That is to say, you don't need 2, you just need 1 and 1. 1 to introduce it and 1 to do it.
It's Tiffany.
Yes.
I think you only have 28 days between November and December this year.
Okay, perfect. So so between November and December. Okay, perfect. Thank you for checking the calendar. So that might just make it easier for everyone, just to make it clear that we could do it.
In other words, you're proposing that we formally introduce it to the council on November 18th.
Right. If it's ready and if everybody's signed off, we can just introduce it that night, and then, as Tiffany just said, there's only 28 days between the November and December meeting, so therefore you couldn't adopt it at the December meeting, so therefore it would get kicked to the January in that sense. But between December and January, there isn't.
The council though can debate.
Yes.
Make suggestions or.
Yep, and they can make this
at the December meeting.
Right, exactly. So they can formally make amendments. They can vote on amendments. Voting on amendments can happen at any time once a bill is introduced, or any type of policy is introduced. So that might be a good option too. We might turn that December meeting into, here's what we have, here are any tweaks, they get voted on, and then those get incorporated into January. So that's just the legislative
Peter,
process
you could
there.
do that even if you introduce in December, just to clarify that.
Yes.
Like, if you guys say, hey, we need more than a week to do this, then if it's introduced in the December meeting, the council will have already had a chance to review, and they can have their discussions then as well.
Right. So you can
shouldn't feel jammed.
Right. That's the main point, is you don't need 2, you just need 1 if it's 30 days apart. So that's just, it's that tricky thing of timing. So that's where things like the.
So if there's just going to be 1, And if it's gonna be in December that
Right.
we introduce, then the council would have to adopt it that night.
No, they
Yeah.
they could adopt it then at the if they introduce it in December, they can just adopt it at the January one. But they would have to do not all the amendments, because you can still amend things up to final adoption. The amendments don't have any layover. There's no layover for amendments. Amendments can happen the same night as final adoption. So if, say, you introduced it in December, it gets approved in January, and there are amendments, they can do that the same night as final adoption. There's not a separate layover for amendments, because the whole way the legislative process is supposed to work is that you can amend things all the way up until final approval, because you never know when something will come up, but there isn't a separate layover for amendments. So that's sort of the long and the short of the legislative process. So either if it's introduced in November or December, that doesn't matter. Either one of them, it gets approved in January because of
But the
that
council
time.
is gonna wanna make, suggestions, comments,
Mm-hmm. And they could
so
do,
they have to do that right away.
they could,
Right.
yeah, that would probably be a, within that time frame, you could probably do that right away, and they could make them. And that's why it's good. That's the buffer where I think is good, is giving them time to review it. From if you submit it December 7th, right, or if you submitted it November 12th or December 7th, they have a week to review it. That allows them to come to the meeting with their edits. But that's pretty easy. I mean, the amendment process is pretty straightforward and doesn't take a lot of time.
I see. Okay.
In the way the legislative process works.
Okay. So, presumably this thing will be adopted on January 20th.
Mhm.
If that is in fact the date of the
Yeah.
council meeting in January.
And it is, and I just checked that while we were sitting here, and that is the case. It is January 20th.
Okay.
So that date is set.
Okay. So that's our agenda.
Mhm.
I would like to be able to introduce it in November, ideally, because that gives the council more time to take a look at it and to consider what they want to do with it. But the election, what's the so-called election season, really begins in February.
Right.
And so we just have a relatively short time. Once the plan is enacted, we really begin implementing it very shortly thereafter. The election day by February should already have been chosen, and I am proposing that it be May 13th. So it's before May 15th, obviously, and it's on a Friday, which I think is a better day to do this than on a Sunday. So that's my proposal. Post an official announcement. The nomination period will begin on some particular date, which I expect will be around March 1st, and all nominations and candidate statements must be received by date B, which I think will be around the end of November.
End of March. Yeah.
Right. What's going on here? Yes.
Sorry, I was moving it back up so that you could see the dates, since you already had the dates there. Okay.
A little bit more. It's still Miles.
What?
Okay, so candidate statements, conflict of interest forms, and all third-party nominations. That is, nominations made by persons other than the one being nominated should be in by the end of the month. And sometimes in there we have to select an election service provider and agree on a contract with the
right.
service provider. In other words, I think you'll do most of the negotiating on that, Niles, but I think we have to, look at the list of tasks. Mainly.
Yeah, and last year I shared. I'm happy to share the RFP that I created last year, and then receive feedback, and then we can do it that way. What I generally do is we usually have an open period of 2 to 3 weeks for a bit. So technically speaking, I should also say that this RFP is under $10,000, which means that the council does not need to formally approve it. But I did last year. I had the council approve it just so that everything was kosher, and I'd like to do the same thing there, um, uh, or at least do it in an administrative thing with the council. That you don't have to worry about that. I'll take care of that part. But
Okay.
we will just have that. And so my idea is, once the plan is approved, at the sort of simultaneously with that, if there's, unless there are major changes to the RFP, which I can send around to everyone, we would issue the RFP like right after, and that way, because the RFP includes what I did last year, and I want to do again, is include as an exhibit in the RFP the plan. That's why I want it to be right after it's approved, so that they know exactly what their responsibilities are, because it ties to the dates that are in the plan, and so therefore we're tying them to the dates. That's the way that would work. All right.
That sounds good.
Mhm.
Okay, so sometime in March, we have to produce the official VMA election information packet, including the candidate statements that will come in at the end of the month approximately.
Mhm.
We have to create an election schedule and provide voting information to go into the election packet. And we have to mail the election packet at least 5 weeks before election day and post it on the VMA website and probably send it out by constant contact as well. During this time, we have to be working on the VMA voting roll. The committee should verify and officially certify the voting roll before sending it to the election services contractor. So April, we mail out the candidate statements and election information, post time and date of the forum. For the forum, we solicit and compile questions, conduct the forum with 2 recordings, primary and backup. Forum should be approximately 3 to 4 weeks before the election, definitely after the voters have received information packets from the committee. The date is not set in the ordinance, will not be set in the ordinance, and so the date of the forum is flexible depending on our needs and the needs of the candidates. We get a draft of the ballot package from the contractor by early April. We approve the draft in ballot format, and then the contractor mails ballots by approximately April 15th, so that's about a month, approximately a month before the date of the election. In other words, the last date of voting. Voters receive ballots by about the 3rd week of April. April and May, voters are voting and mailing ballots to the contractor between late April and mid-May. Committee report about the forum after completion on the VMA website, along with a link to the recording to enable people to go back and listen again to what was said. Post weekly voting reminders in the run-up to the election period, conduct a vote, and then after the election, we have to conduct a vote counting session with the contractor, check all data, make sure ballots and votes add up, and present an election report. And basically that's it. We have a report to present in June, and I think by that time we're done. So this obviously is a very sketchy description of the tasks that have to be accomplished and the approximate dates by which they should be accomplished, just to give everybody a sort of a broad outline of what's there. As I said, I will be sending out a proposed election plan perhaps tomorrow to all of the members of the committee. And again, I may have to work through you, Niles, to get it to everybody. Please review the proposed plan carefully. You can look at other plans that were presented in prior years, obviously on the village website, and hopefully we will be able to get changes and adoption of the proposed ordinance very quickly, hopefully before the November council meeting, so that we can present it and have it be introduced formally at the November council meeting.
All right. And technically, I mean, this is a very minor thing. Technically, the plan and everything is a resolution, not an ordinance, because you're not changing the code. You're just, this is the legal correction for this. So like the resolution explains that you are legally required to do this versus because the code is permanent and so on.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then, and sorry, I was something with Louisa. But yeah, so so that's just a technical thing, and don't worry necessarily about the form of that. Ron has a template that we use for those type of things. So it's more the plan and the procedures and that type of stuff that you focus on.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that's all I have tonight.
Uh,
George, I was going to ask you to talk about the other things that were on your agenda, but I think we've completely run out of time.
My battery.
This is what I'm sorry.
she was saying that her battery was dying, so I think she had to drop off right there.
Oh, I see. I see.
But
So,
yeah.
I've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I apologize that we didn't have time for you to go through the other things that you wanted to talk about. But I thought it was important to do the items that we did. So we're meeting next Monday. I'll send this out, and I'm not completely positive that I can get the minutes for this meeting out before that time, but I think I can.
Mm-hmm.
As long as we follow Andrew's rules about just the things that were decided.
Peter, I'm a little concerned about George not getting time, and I think it's time to wrap up for sure. I agree. Is there something, George, that you can share, like a written document or something that you can share with committee members that can be reviewed before next week?
Yeah, so I've actually got a couple of parts. One, just like basic admin stuff, I can cover in less than a minute now. If you're willing to give it to me. It's basically
everybody's agreeable.
Yeah, continued reminder. No matter what, any emails about anything relating to the committee, CC the committee inbox. Just Niles can attest, it makes everyone's life massively easier if we get a public information request that it's all in one place and we're not individually having to do data scrapes. I think Leah is the only other one of the committee members who I think has the password other than me. Niles obviously has it.
Yeah. And Peter, if you want to call me anyways, I can give you the password in the tomorrow morning anyways. Yeah.
Call Niles or call me.
And if Paul, and we can touch base with Natalie too, and if you guys want the password as well, I can give it to you too. But Peter, we definitely just call me in the morning and I'll get it to you.
You bet. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. And to Andrew's concern, almost everything else that I had put on the agenda is all admin operations side stuff that is not time sensitive. And it sounds like we're going to be reviewing minutes and some ethical principles and an entire election plan in the next 3 days. So all of that I am more than happy to push down the road until whatever time it crops up. I think some of them are going to naturally just evolve on how we're doing document sharing and storage to make it easier for everyone to edit.
I appreciate that, George. We'll find the time.
And I have thoughts on that too.
One question I had is just because of the really compressed timeline. I know you said you were sending around a proposed plan to all of us tomorrow. Is it something that looks manifestly different or major changes from kind of previous plans?
No,
or is that
I think it's very similar to prior plans. And really, I wrote a basically drawing from plans last year and in prior years before that. There are some changes, but you'll see.
Okay.
They won't be hard to find.
Got it.
There's a hand up over here.
Yeah.
Sure,
Oh, yeah.
Behind that iPad. I'm sorry.
That's Tiffany. Hang on one second.
I didn't know if you guys were taking resident comments at the end, so I wanted to toss it out there. I'm a little surprised to hear, and I know, Peter, it's your recommendation that the committee will vote on, but since one of the number one comments we received last year was a desire to return to in-person elections, I'm surprised to hear the starting point being mail-in. I strongly advocate for using a contractor for mail-in. I think that makes the life of for the absentee ballot process. I think that makes the life of village volunteers easier and is a good return on investment for village
Yeah.
funds. But, you know, after the last 2 years of election, again, that just the number one kind of comment we received was returning to the celebration on the sidewalk and having folks there voting in person. Something they take their kids to and have build memories.
Well, I appreciate that, Tiffany. You know, I think the mail-in balloting is going to be much easier for us as a committee, but also much easier, I think, for voters. You know, there are voters who find it hard to get out, and the pandemic is not over. It hasn't gone away. And of course, none of us know what it'll look like next spring. But if we have to plan now, you know, I would say that people will still be concerned about the pandemic, and you know that's another reason I think to favor a mail-in approach. As to the celebration on the sidewalk, I think we can have a celebration on the sidewalk without voting, and I think that we should go for what's the easiest and most efficient way to do the voting process. And let a lot of the vote counting be done by the contractor. I think that's more efficient. I think it's friendlier to voters, and I would urge the council to consider the possibility of having a celebration on the street for some purpose other than voting. For example, to get the free ice cream. I would say that's a possible motivation for a celebration. But we have multiple events as a community, and I know traditionally it's been associated with the voting process, but I do think that I think we'll get more voter participation. I think we will make our lives easier. It's easier for voters, easier for everyone involved, except for people who want to go to the sidewalk celebration. So that's my view. I don't know. What do you think?
George, you had your hand up, so do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say, I think ultimately, like and I don't want to speak because two of them are on the call right now. I think ultimately it's a council call. So I think one thing that I would just recommend as a good best practice for us is as we're going through and updating the plan, functionally, you just kind of, I think, starting off with an orientation one way or the other makes sense. I'm with you, Peter. I think my inclination is lean towards vote by mail unless something major changes. But I think as we go through the election plan, trying to just highlight and track for ourselves, this is what was different from last year or from the 2019 one. And these are the changes that we've made this year. So that way, if it is something where the December or January meeting comes and the council says, it's our decision that we want to do an in-person one, it's really easy for us just to go through and take some of the old plans for in-person voting and say, okay, this is the old plan, and we know the section on the nomination deadlines, that needs to change, and how we're handling the ballot counting thing, it's that change, just to make it a little easier. So that way, if it is a council decision in January that they don't want to do vote by mail, they want to do in person, those are changes that can be made much more easily and with a bare minimum of kind of fuss. And so that would just be my recommendation of, I'm with you. I like planning for vote by mail, but as we go through it in the next couple of days, just tracking where changes are cropping up. So that way, if it is something that we did have to audible at the last minute, we're in a good position to do that without having to start from scratch.
Okay, sounds reasonable. Andrew.
Just real quickly, and we have plenty of time to talk about this still, but I think there's an option for doing this in a hybrid way, where we do, the mail-in with an option to organize this sidewalk celebration on the deadline date, where folks that didn't mail it in can still submit in person. I mean, look, we're learning a lot about COVID, and science is obviously evolving. but we've learned that outdoor activity, especially if you're masked, relatively safe. We had this party, I hope it wasn't a super spreader. People seem very comfortable. I think in the spring, people are going to be feeling comfortable as well. We have high vaccination rates in the area, but I want to be sensitive to those that don't feel comfortable, period. But I still think there's an opportunity to do this in a hybrid way. I want maximum participation. I think that's, as George pointed out in the chat, we had the highest number of participation, I think, in village history possibly. And I think the hybrid option might continue us down that path possibly and bring some joy and normalcy to the village as well. But I think
My belief is that the hybrid path involves significantly greater amounts of work. It's as if we're running a
listen, I don't know if that's true. If it's just the same envelopes and just a ballot box. I mean, you just have people can send it in. There's a cost involved. I don't think there's more work except for volunteers on the sidewalk who are sitting, who are next to the ballot box. And,
right. Well, the people at the ballot box will be members of the committee.
Right. Or or they're volunteers. So in the past, there were people who were elected judges.
One of your final good deeds, and the ballots eventually. But I mean, it's an hour and a half or 2 hours as we're here just now.
Right. I don't think it's the time sitting on the sidewalk that is the burden. It's creating a ballot that works, that can be filled out in person. It's checking the voter rolls, as to who's going to be voting in person and who has put in who is somehow or other without actually informing the committee that they're sending in a mail ballot. Somehow the committee is supposed to, have a voter roll that corresponds to the people who have not submitted a mail ballot. And so I think they're just logistically, and it's not about sitting on the sidewalk. It's about handling a large amount of information, in two different ways. It's as if we were running two different elections at the same time. That's my understanding.
It depends on how the committee wants to, how the council and the committee want to do it. So you could have various different approaches. I know of various different approaches. What we did in Rockville, for example, was we had one voting place, which was the city hall in Rockville, and we just had people come in. They could fill out their ballots. They could put it in the ballot box there, and then that was taken to the same voting place as where all of the vote by mail ones were. So you could have a thing where they received the ballots. They received the ballots on the day of. Either they were previously mailed to them and they could just walk it in, and you can fill it out whenever it gets put, and then we ship that to the vendor. We could do that, especially if vote counting is 2 weeks later. So it's just how it's collected. Or you could have it where people submit their ballots the day of there. We hold them somewhere else, and then you just have to manually count them. But there are various different ways we could approach it, and I'm not saying to do it. I'm not saying not. I'm just giving you my experience, which is that the logistics of it could be tackled in various different ways if that's what the council wanted to do. And I know of some methods.
Did I understand you to suggest that the mail-in ballots would go in 2 weeks before?
No. What I'm saying is, because by the schedule that we talked about, the counting of the votes would take place 2 weeks after the election day, which is the last day you can mail it in. And if that's election day, the people who are voting that day, right, the day of the election, we could have them vote on the sidewalk, put it in some kind of, put it in a container, secured by the committee. Then we could ship that to the election provider, and then they would be counted at the same time as the vote by mail ones by the election provider. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, the hybridness is just
you have to be sure that nobody's voted twice.
Well, the vendor can determine that. I mean, one of the things that you could do is have the vendor, because they would be receiving all of the ballots, right? And they could say this person. Right, but they could say on,
So suppose somebody mails in their ballot, but also shows up on the sidewalk and votes.
right. So we could,
So nobody will know which ballot was the one that he voted.
right,
So we will know that he voted twice.
right.
So I guess at that point we would then throw out the mail ballot.
You could throw out both mailed ballots, or you could do it where if we mailed out ballots to everyone, right, they would have to either bring the ballot, since they don't want to mail it back. They would bring the ballot that they were mailed. It's only one ballot, and then put that in the envelope just in front of everyone, or I mean not in front of everyone, but when they're putting it in the ballot box.
That was
Or
kind of,
yeah,
that was kind of my idea, Peter.
Yeah.
To simplify it. Everyone gets a mail-in ballot, but you have the option to bring that one ballot. There is no
Yeah.
out a ballot at the box, but you just bring that because you don't want to mail it because of
Right.
all the concerns about the mail going lost.
Right.
And then,
So basically we're running a mail-in
election. You just
ballot or vote election, but with there being a single collection point.
Yeah.
As an alternative to the U.S. Postal Service.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, listen,
Right.
this is
very technical, but yeah. But essentially, there's that, and then you can also do it where if someone lost their ballot, because the other thing that we didn't discuss tonight is that all of the ballots would have control numbers, or all of the envelopes would have control numbers. And what you could do is if somebody said, "Oh, I lost my ballot. I'm going to show up on election day to fill out a ballot," that we would have the control number of their previous ballot, and we would just cancel that, meaning that the vendor would never accept that one, and only the one that's day of. But that's very technical.
I tried to take account of that.
Yeah.
Didn't we have that happen? We had two.
Yeah, we had people who lost it, who lost their ballot. We had one person who, without their envelope, just submitted a ballot, and we had no idea where that came from, and we locked it up and said, and that one didn't get counted because they didn't provide anything. They just provided the ballot anonymously in the mailbox. So
we did have one where someone dropped it off in the envelope with the ballot control number where we could also go to the election vendor and we asked them, here is the control number. Is that a valid control number?
Yeah.
Does that correspond to
that resident?
It had not been canceled because, as
Yeah.
Miles mentioned,
Yeah.
they updated, and their process is anytime we had to send a second ballot to someone, they canceled out the old one, so there was no chance of them being able to send that in a second time.
Right.
And it just goes to the guiding principles of making it as easy as possible for folks to vote.
Right.
Folks feel more comfortable voting in person, and others think the mail-in ballot was the easiest.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I know people are trying to go to sleep. I just wanted to raise that could be something for the committee.
And that can be dealt with how we do it. Yeah.
I've heard it strongly suggested. Choose one or the other. Mail-in ballots the easiest. The worst possible outcome is a hybrid. In terms of work, in terms of accuracy, in terms of voter participation. So,
right.
That's, I haven't done this before. I'm a newcomer to all of this.
Well, maybe we should invite for a future committee meeting those that are of that opinion or have experience, and why they think hybrid is the worst case scenario. When it sounds to others that I've spoken to that might provide the most options to folks and ease participation. So.
Okay.
Right.
So we are going to have a meeting next Monday evening, and I would say 7 o'clock instead of 7:30, unless anyone objects. And we will have to send out stuff quickly.
Yeah.
To make that happen.
Well, the date is.
I'm sorry.
So the only thing on that, Peter, is the date is set. I or Martha will create a Zoom link tomorrow morning.
Okay.
The only thing is an agenda, just so that we have it, so that you have to, under best practice for the Open Meeting Act, is you want to have at least 24 hours. And I like to think 24 hours doesn't include weekends for the purposes of our residents. So having the agenda out tomorrow as well in the weekly wrap up
Okay.
suffices that. So just if you could develop, and you again, when we talk in the morning, when you call me, if you want to tell me what the agenda items are, I can send it around to everybody and say this is what Peter has suggested. And if there's no changes, we can just put it that way. But I'm just saying we just need an agenda. That's the other thing for Monday. Okay?
Okay, sounds good. I can do that.
All right. Perfect.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Mhm. Hope this was helpful and that things go smoothly with this. So I really appreciate having all of your guidance and help in doing this, because this is a new experience, certainly for me. And so having some people who are more experienced than I is going to be very helpful. I appreciate it.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much. And I will see some or all of you on Monday.
All right. Thank
So,
you.
okay, good night.
I'm just going to end the meeting for all, so nobody has to do anything else. So
Okay.
Miles, do we need to move to adjourn, or can we just adjourn?
technically speaking, yeah. So technically speaking, it can go either way. Let's just move to adjourn just to do it.
I move to adjourn.
Okay. Do I have a second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Okay. And Leah's on a call, so you count. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
All right.